Hello everyone, welcome back to Android Study Champs. Uh, my name is Shubhaprasad Padhy and today we'll be completing the session 2 of Android Basics. Hello everyone, welcome back to Android Study Champs. Just give me a second. I hope my audio is loud and clear. Yeah. So as a reminder, these sessions are designed for people with no prior programming experience to learn how to build basic Android apps in Kotlin. Now, the prerequisites knowledge is that you have completed session 1 of Android Basics with us or on your own. You could have completed the first 3 pathways of Unit 1 from the Android Basic in Kotlin course. We'll be picking up from there. It's also helpful if you have an Android device, but if not, you can still use the emulator on the computer. Now, let's start off by recapping what we did last time. We learned how to write and run a program in Kotlin, how to set up Android Studio on the computer, how to start a project from a template in Android Studio, how to run an Android app on the emulator and a physical device if applicable, add text and images to layout, modify attributes on a text view or image view. Now that was all that we had done in the previous session, and that is all that was covered in the first 3 pathways in the first unit. In this session, you will complete Unit 1 of the Android Basics in Kotlin course by finishing the pathway 4, add a button to an app. And in this pathway, you will be building an interactive app called the Dice Roller app. It rolls a dice when the button is pressed and updates the screen when the result is with the result that we want to display. At the end of the pathway, if you pass the quiz successfully, you earn this badge for your developer profile that you can always share on the social media platforms or just put them in the developer profile and decorate for the sake. Now let's dive into some of the high level concepts that you will be learning. To build this app, you will need to understand what an activity in Android is. An activity is the part of your application that presents a window that can display the app's content on the screen. In the Dice Roller app, you will be building, there is only one activity, and that is called the main activity. When you open up the app, the main activity launches. The layout is drawn on the screen, and the user can start interacting with the app. You will be modifying the main activity by adding Kotlin code for what should happen when the user taps on the button in the app. Now, as you write the Kotlin code for your app, you will need to understand what classes and objects are. You can think of a class like a blueprint. It contains instruction for how to create something. From the dice blueprint, you can create actual dice. More specifically, the dice class contains details like what properties a dice has. For example, the number of sides and how it behaves. For example, a dice can be rolled is a behavior of that particular dice. The great advantage of having the dice class is now you can create as many dice object instances as you want, as shown in the diagram. It saves time from having to write all the same code over and over again. This makes your code more organized and easier to maintain. Now let's jump right into the Kotlin playground to see more of classes and objects. I hope my screen is visible and you can actually see the Kotlin playground right now. So let's look a bit more into the object-oriented programming language. Object means a real-world entity such as a pen, chair, table, computer, or watch, etc. Anything that you see around yourself can be considered as an object. It is a real-world entity. Object-oriented programming is a methodology or a paradigm to design a program using classes and objects. And it simplifies software development and maintenance by providing some concepts like object, class, inheritance, polymorphism, abstraction, and encapsulation. Inheritance is when one object acquires all the properties and behaviors of the parent object. It is known as inheritance. It provides code reusability. It is used to achieve runtime polymorphism. Polymorphism is if one task is performed in different ways, it is known as polymorphism. For example, to convince the customer differently to draw something, for example, shape, triangle, rectangle, etc. Abstraction is hiding internal details and showing functionality. For example, phone call. We don't know the internal processing, but we only see the outer layer, that is the phone call itself. Another great example would be the application programming interface, where we use the API calls by providing an input and getting an output, but we don't actually know what happens in the backend. That is the abstractions that we are having. Another thing that object-oriented programming has, or is a feature of object-oriented programming, is encapsulation. Now, encapsulation is wrapping up of data and code together into a single unit, are known as encapsulation. So, for example, a capsulate is wrapped with different medicines. In case of object-oriented programming, we are encapsulating different properties of a particular into a class. When we're creating a blueprint, for example, that I was mentioning, blueprint of a dice, then we are having its properties, we are having its size as a property of the dice, as well as a functionality, that is the dice can roll, encapsulated into one particular class. Now let's look into some of the things before we actually start making an application, that is the dice roller application. And as you can see, this is the code that I had already written. Fun main, val dice range, val random number. So what exactly this code means? In the previous session, I had mentioned about this fun keyword. Fun is a keyword, and a keyword in simple terms is a predefined word that holds some meaning to the language. So for example, fun is actually a word that has some meaning to the Kotlin language, to the compiler that compiles this program. So when we are writing fun and writing a name, in this case it is main, followed with parentheses, we are declaring this main named function. So inside everything will be executed once this main function is called. The thing about Kotlin is every Kotlin program has the main function, and the compiler at the beginning calls this main function. So everything inside should automatically be executed once we click on this run button on the top right corner. You guys also can go to this website. I had already provided the link in the Telegram group, and can also write this code, and it should work fine, and run and play with it as you want. So what happens inside this is we are declaring a range. This is a syntax of the Kotlin, so that you can use to declare a range. And the range in this case is 1 to 6. So using double dots, we are saying that this is a range from 1 to 6. If I say write 1 dot dot 10, it means we are declaring a range in this dice range variable from 1 to 10. Let's just change it to 6 again, because in general we have seen 6 face dice more often. And then we are having this variable random number, where we'll be saving the random number that we'll be getting from this range. So there is a predefined function in the Kotlin that actually works on the range itself. That is the random function. So we can call it like this: dice range. Using the dot operator, we are calling the random function of that particular range, and that should return us a value randomly from 1 to 6. Now we are then printing that variable in this println statement. Using the dollar function, we can actually put the variable. We had seen this in the session 1, and you must have also read it in the pathway 1, I believe. And once we click on the run button, it should actually run this program, and we should see a value that should be between 1 to 6. It is 5. If we run again, it might come as 5 again, or some other number between 1 to 6. And if we change the range, say for example 6 to 12, then we should get a value from 6 to 12. One thing to note is, as you can see, we are getting the number 10. So one thing to note is ranges can be between n integers. The following are valid ranges: 3 to 46, 0 to 270, minus 6 to plus 6, and minus 10 to minus 4. All these are valid ranges. It can be anything from a lower limit integer to a higher limit integer. As long as it is in valid syntax, it should work properly. Now you can call functions directly on a range. For example, 1 dot dot 6 dot random. If we can write directly, it will do the same thing as storing the random number that we are already getting from the random number. And then you can also directly print it. So for example, you can put this directly and can execute all this entire code in just one sentence, on one line. Now let's actually move on to something that we'll be using and is actually very interesting. So class. Class is, as I have mentioned, is like a blueprint of an actual actual object. So for example, that we had already taken an example of, say, dice. But let's just take another example, say a class of fruits, a class of cars, a vehicles. So what we're doing over here is we are actually defining a blueprint so that we can create an object of that particular class. What it actually helps us achieve is we can actually put different properties of that particular object in a class, so that it would help us to enumerate those objects. We can create multiple objects of that particular class, as long as many as we want, without writing the same code again and again. So it is actually very reusable. Now, how do we define a class in Kotlin language? Let me comment line this so that we can move on to the next part, that is, how do we define a class? As you can see, this is how we actually define a class. This is very familiar with defining a function. What we are doing with a function is we are writing the fun keyword and then writing the name with a parenthesis and then the curly brackets, and within that goes the code that we actually are concerned with. So in this case, say for example, class dice, we just have to write the keyword class. Now, as I had already defined what keyword already is, and class also hold a meaning to the compiler. What class hold the meaning is, it is saying that this identifier, this name dice, is a class, and inside this curly bracket we can define its properties. For example, side is a variable of this class dice, and uh, as we know, every dice has sides, so every dice also has faces. And if you want to add more properties, you can say has faces 6. In general, it should be same. And you can add other features like, uh, let's say you can add inside it a function that would say roll, so that it actually rolls. uh, this is just a general concept that you can add the different properties of that different object inside the blueprint, that is the class of dice, for in this case, for example. Now, let's move on to some application of these classes and objects, and that is actually what we'll be using inside our Android Studio IDE to make the dice roller application. Now, let me just show you this code. So let's just see this definition of this class dice. As I had said, one property could be sides and another property could be row. What this is saying is roll is a function. So the dice, when we call the roll function, it should return us a value. Just like in real life, when you roll a dice, it gives you a face. For example, it can be any number between 1 to 6, and the roll should do a similar job, and that is what it is actually doing. And this is the exact code that that we had seen for getting the random number between some ranges. So one dot sides is actually the range that we are providing here. Sides, as you can see, is a variable that stores the value. The literal 6, this is an integer, and one dot 6 means it should give us a random number between 1 to 6, and val random number saves that number and returns that number. So whenever we declare an object of this dice, call this roll function, it should give us a number between 1 to 6. And this is how we actually call or actually declare the object of a class. As you can see, we can store an object inside a variable, just like we were doing for any other data types. For example, we were doing it for an integer, a literal, um, that can be a character, a string, a float value, a decimal value. And similarly, we can create or consider the object as um, as something that we can store inside a variable, and the class as a data type that we are defining. So there are some predefined data types like integer and float that actually uh, are necessary for a compiler to understand. And then we are building a data type for us that is preferable to us, of which we can build later on objects. That is, in this case, we are actually making the object by calling the name of that class and passing two parentheses, open parenthesis and close parenthesis. And this is actually making an object. And then that object we are storing using the assignment operator inside the name my first dice. So this my first dice is referring to the object of this class dice, And later on, when we want to actually uh, have have a have a literal dice properties like its sides or the rolling functionality, then we can just do that with this object itself, which we will just see right now. One more thing is, if you're familiar with Java, then we were doing it in similar way with using the new keyword. And this is something that Kotlin does this for us. The new keyword is used to assign the object, or assign the object of that particular class. So when we are using the new keyword, it gives value to all the non-defined or the non-assigned value, or non-assigned data types inside that particular class. So for example, if you have the dice and there is this size 6 and it is not assigned, it is actually being assigned some value. So that is something that can be helpful if you are not if you are facing some bugs if in future. Now, as I said, this my first dice is an actual object of the dice class. So every functionality of this class, that is the sides, or be it the function role that should return as a value, we can use it on this my first dice. So it is very simple. How do we access these properties? Using the dot operator. So we just write the name of that variable that we are storing or referring to the object of dice, and use the dot operator, and then we call the properties like the function of that object. So role is an object you can see over here, and we can actually call it. And this would give us a value within 1 to 6. As you can see, we had already defined it inside it. And it should give us a value. Since we are not changing the value of sites, it is 1 dot dot 6 only, and it should give us a value 1 to 6. And we are then printing using the dollar operator. We are printing it, and we will see it in the console that it is showing us the result that we require. And then what we're doing is we are actually changing the sites. Sites is a property of dice, and we can actually change it. So we are assigning 20, for example, in this case, to that object. So in this case, when we call the role function, as you can see, we are actually calling the role function, and it should print the value from 1 to 20, because the current value of sites is 20 now. So actually, when we run this code, it should initially show us that the size is 6 and the role is between 1 to 6. And in the next step, the size should be 20 and the role is between 1 to 20. We should get a value between 1 and 20. The compiler is taking some time. Here it is. So your 6-sided dice roll 2. As you can see, we had 6-sided and the value is between 1 and 6. And the next statement shows that the side is 20 that we had changed to, and the value is 19. Now, one more thing that we can see is we can actually do some customization in the class, and this is how you can do it. Let me show you the code for that as well. So one thing is constructors. It is a very important part of a class. When you are defining the blueprint of something, there are certain things that you need to give value to. For example, in case of dice, you can define the blueprint of a dice as it has some properties like sides. It has a functionality that it can give us the value between the number of sides that it has. And when you are actually creating an object, it is very convenient if we can actually build an actual object with multiple instances that have multiple different properties that can vary from each other. For example, a side can have 6 sides, while a dice can have 10 sides, or a 20 sides, or even 100 sides. So what constructor does is, when you are defining the object of the particular class, you can pass arguments through it to assign some value to variables of a, or the properties of a class. So for example, in a class dice, there is a number of sides that can vary from dice to dice. So it would be very convenient for us as a programmer to actually have this as a argument. So when we're writing a class dice, this is how you can put an argument inside. This is the same way that you're putting it in a function. Nothing much different. You just provide the data type that you are going to pass. Number of sides is a integer type, so we are saying that it would be an integer type, and the name that is for our sake, because we'll be using or we'll be knowing that it is that from that name only. So then we are having this function that as we had, but instead of the static variable size that was always assigned 6, now we will be having this num size, which is assigned during the creation of the object. So now when we actually call the object, we have to pass the argument. And in this case, there is only one argument, so we can pass one argument. If there was a multiple arguments, we can pass multiple argument using comma operator. And of course, it needs to be also mentioned over here using comma operator. And this is how you can pass multiple arguments. And you need to make sure that the number of arguments you have defined during the declaration of a class must be same as the during the calling of that class to make the object. So in this case, we can actually pass the sides. Earlier, we had to change the sides by using the dot operator, which was one more step. Now we have a much better, cleaner code and easier to understand for us as well. So you can pass the argument 6. So it should have a 6-sided dice. And in this case, it should have a 20-sided dice. And if you run this code, it should give us this a similar output as to that of the previous one. But this is actually a much more developer-friendly code. And the compiler should show us the result. While the compiler is compiling and would show us the result, one thing to note is that changing the code to make it shorter, more efficient, or easier to read and understand is called refactoring. It is one uh, word I feel like every developer should know, because not just writing code is important, but writing better and efficient code is much more important. It's like writing a document. When you write a first draft that has all the information, then edit and refine your words. So this is something everyone must know. It is taking an awful lot of time. So as we wait for the result, let's just see the final code that we had written. And as you can see, this is the final code. This is exactly what I just mentioned and explained. And now we'll be taking a break, and hopefully within that we will have the result. So I hope you're having, if you have any questions, you can ask them in the chat. I'll be sure to answer them.
Hello. Hello.
Harshvardhan is asking, can't we write the codes more simple? Why make it more complicated by using encapsulation and inheritance? The answer is very simple. We are not making it complicated. We are actually making it more simpler. Uh, as you can see, the properties of encapsulation and inheritance. Let me explain it one by one again. You might have missed the definitions. So encapsulation is wrapping up of data into one unit. For example, we are having multiple properties of one object stored inside a particular class, a particular blueprint that we can actually use multiple amount of times, and is more convenient for us and more simpler and more developer friendly, as well as more easy to organize. So encapsulation, as you can see, is actually making it more simpler. And then there is inheritance. Inheritance basically means that you are actually having another object that can inherit the properties of another class or object. So basically, this allows us code reusability. So if you have, say, for example, a class, say a class say cars, right? And then you have a class say bikes, right? And some of the properties are very similar to that of the cars and that of the bikes. Like both of them are actually running on their own. Both of them are vehicles. So you can actually have those properties inherited from another class, and it actually makes things much more easier rather than complicated. That was a great question, and I hope it is more clear to you now. And if you have any further questions, then you can ask them in the chat. I'll be sure to clear them.
Yes, thank you, Shubhaprasad. I have another question that is it necessary to do Android development in Kotlin only, like Kotlin language? Can't we use other environment like Java, Python, etc.?
So that's also a great question, and yeah, you can definitely use Java as well to do Android development. And I think I had mentioned it in the first session only that it is possible to do in Java. And I myself have started learning Android development from Java and have recently learned Kotlin. And I can definitely guarantee you that there are some benefits with Kotlin that you cannot find in Java. Like there is much less code, and it is actually preferred language for by the Google. And a lot of statistics actually suggest that Kotlin would be the more or the better language for the future for Android development.
Thank you. And I was also asking, I have another question that can you show some example like any other projects you have worked with Java besides Kotlin?
Definitely, I can show you, but that is probably beyond the scope of this meet. And I will be showing you it on the uh, Telegram group if you want, or I can actually give you the code or the GitHub of some of the projects that I have worked on Java that you can have for reference.
Thank you. Okay, I will follow the Telegram. Thank you very much.
In case if you have missed something, this is the summary of classes and objects. You can read it, and if you have any questions, you can also ask. We'll be starting the next part of this pathway in probably 30 or 40 more seconds. Uh, okay. So we should be starting the next part of this session, and where we will be actually building that application, that is the dice roller application. So I hope my screen is visible. And before I actually start, let me just show you what we're actually building in this session. I have already written code and I'll be rewriting. So once we roll the or press this roll button, it should show us a random number between 1 and 6. The same logic that you're using in the Kotlin, but we'll be implementing it in the application and actually have an interface like this that you can actually build along with me as well if you want. So it should give us random values. It's very simple at first look, and is actually very simple to build also. I hope my screen is visible. So first thing that you need to do is click on this file, go to new, and then there is the new project, this, and you have to click on the new project, select the layout that you are comfortable with, and some of this layout are for different purposes, and basically you're looking at empty layout, bottom navigation layout, basic layout for your general starting application, and empty layout is very convenient, and you can actually just click on next after selecting the layout, give a name to your application. It can be anything. In general, we give name in the camel case where uh, the first letter is starting from the capital letter. This is by convention. You can give actually any name that is as long as valid in the identifier. So, say for example, dice roller or dice roll is something that you will be giving the name by convention in the camel case. Now you choose the language Kotlin over here. Of course, you can choose Java, and you can also use Java and Kotlin together to build an application. But in this course, we are looking at Kotlin, so we'll be using Kotlin. You have to choose the minimum SDK, the API that you are targeting, and in this case, we can choose Marshmallow or anything lower or anything higher. It should be fine. We're building a simple application, so it is nothing much complex to be looking at. So after you select all these, click on the finish button, and you should have the basic template ready. This is something that we had already learned in the first session. So you have a basic layout that is activity main.xml and a Kotlin file that actually has that actually would have the logic of your application, and the XML file would have the layout of your application. The layout of your application is in the XML file. So uh, XML file is basically stores in key value pair, just like other objects like JSON uh, object. It is similar to something like that, and it stores in the key value pair. So different attributes or different properties of different objects, like this is a text object and it has different attributes or properties. It as you can see in the right side of the screen, so you can change this directly over here. This is a very simple graphics user interface that is given to you, and if you want to actually write the code for it, you can actually see that it is very simple. You just have to write the keyword or the key that you are referring to and the value that you want to give. So for example, layout width is the key, and the value we have given is wrap content, which means the width should be as much as the content inside text. Now, these are something that we had already written, so we should be looking at making the application right now. So first and foremost, we have a button, right? And we should have the button inside this layout that we can click, and it should be responsive. It should do something, and we will see how to do that in just a second. So few of the important points that you need to see is you need to give it constants. This constants specify where this particular object goes on a layout, and this is actually very important. And if you say, for example, don't give constant, then by default it would go to the left of the screen, and this would create definitely a bug for you, and would you would be facing much more problem later on. So it is better to give constants right from the start, and if you don't give constants, you can actually see that actually see that it over here it shows a red color exclamation mark, which says missing constants. And this is how you can know later on when you have multiple objects over here in this component tree. If you can see that there is a red color exclamation mark, then you should know that that is not a good thing to have, and you should try to remove it. So even if you put just two constant, that should be enough for this button to hold on to this layout. And this is something how you remove the constant error that you would be getting over here. And after that, you can see there is a warning over here. So the warning says the hard coded text, and that is because everything inside this button that it shows is a text, and we can change it to anything. So for example, role, because we're making a dice rolling app, and the button should say role. So this role is even hard coded because we have just written it directly. And once you click on it, and you can see there is a fix button, and you can actually give a key to this particular value that you want to use. So let's just say role button. I usually follow the snake case for this kind of naming. You can follow camel case as well, and the value that we want to give maybe role. So whenever we refer to this key, that is role button, it should show us the value role, like this one with a capital R. So if you click on OK and go to the code, actually it would be much easier to understand in the code. You can see that inside text, now it is not saying role, but saying @string / role button. So what exactly is this @string? This is also an XML file where the key is this particular thing, that is role underscore button, and the value is obviously this. And you can actually go to resources, layout, sorry, not layout, values, and strings.xml, and you can see the name that we are saying is role button, and this is the value. And this is very this is something that, like, this is a good programming practice. You should not hard code it, and should have actually it in the string keep anywhere in a XML format, so that later on if you want to say introduce multi-language support, or say for example um, if you want some accessibility control, so that you can actually hear what it is saying, this is actually much easier to do with if you have it in this format. Now, after that, there should not be any warning, and it is actually a perfectly done button on a layout. And as you can see, it is not actually very difficult, and you should be able to do it as well. And once you click on this run button by selecting the emulator that you have, it should run this application on that particular phone or the emulator. But we just don't want to make a button itself. We want to have that button do something. And let's just put a text view for now, so that we can see that that button is working. And the ID is one of the important things. This is how the program knows what this object is. And in this case, it is text view, which is very fine for us. And after that, let's just put some constant over here as well. We remove this constant and just make it look decent. You can just drag from this particular bubble like thing to another object bubble, or to the parent itself, and that should give you the constant that you want. And it actually is very convenient for the operating system to know, or like optimize it for different screen sizes. So this is something that you should actually do, like practice. Having a good programming practice is always good for application when you are actually making it for large scale. Now we are going to go to the main code, where we are actually going to declare the button. So let's choose val to say that it is a variable, and give that name something, and the type of that is button. And the way the program knows that we are referring to that particular object is by this function, which is already predefined by Android for us. So you can use find view by ID, then click on R. R means the resource directory, and inside that we need to go to the ID directory, and inside that we need to find the button, which is the ID for this. If you might see, it says button over here. So now it is referring to the button. So how we define what happens on click is uh, very similar to web also. Like you just need to write on click listener, set on click listener, and inside this curly braces, whatever you write would happen whenever this button is clicked. For the time being, let's just say button clicked. Let's just call it a function. You can use alt enter to autocomplete the function declaration, and it will declare it for you. And inside this is for the time being, give a post. Most of these things are very similar to even if you do it in Java as well. The only difference is the syntax that we have learned so far, and that also has not a lot of difference. Um, like Kotlin is very similar to Java whenever we speak about very simple. Post. So so we run this program, and assuming that there are no bugs in this simple code that we have written so far, and we click on this button, we get a toast at the bottom of the screen. That button is clicked. This is the text that we're passing, and we're getting it. So it is for now. You can actually change it and set the text view over here to any text that you want to give. But basically, this is to showcase that there is the functionality. This that the button click is working. And for the time being, we just want to make the dice application. So instead of text view, what we want is an image view. And before we get the image view on the layout, I actually want to get the images. And that is very simple. You click on this resource manager from project. You go to the resource manager, click on this add button, and click on this import drawables. And I actually have the images downloaded. You can select all images at once and click on OK, and it change anything, any value or anything you want to over here. Click on next and importing. Clicking on importing, it should import the images of those particular dice. Now this is very simple. This is simple graphic user interface, and let's just put this as an example. As you can see, the size is very big, and this is something we can change in the layout width. Let's set it to something like 180 dp and 200 dp. Now it is actually something big. Now, similarly, we have to set the constants of that image view. So let's just do that. And now this is how it should appear whenever you open the or run the emulator. That is what it should show, but that is not what we actually want. We actually want to set the image view a uh, particular image whenever that button is clicked. So let's create a variable image size maybe, and set the type of that as image view. And again, using find view by id r.id, the id of that should be image view. And the way you set the image inside the Kotlin function is by using the variable name that you gave. and set image resource, and inside that you can pass the uh, r.drawable and the image of that particular drawable, and it should set that particular image. So one of the simple thing that you can do is actually declare the class. We had already done that, so I will be just importing the class that we had created. It's very simple, as we had seen. So, for example, this is the function that we had, and this is the class dice that we had. I had already shown you how to declare these classes and what exactly this class is doing, and we are actually be using this in that particular. Also import the basic of that so that we can actually save some time rather than writing this code. Okay. This is some of the basic functionality that we'll be using inside when we'll be clicking that button instead. And this is very simple. We are, as we were creating an object of dice class using the identifier and then passing an argument that is actually the number of sides, and using the role functionality, we are getting a random variable, a random integer between 1 to that uh, number of sides that we're passing. So it should give us a value between 1 and 6. Now, dice image is the image view that will be setting the image into. Again, using the when keyword, we are passing the argument that is the dice roll, that is the random number, and if it is one, then using this syntax, which is like an arrow followed with a dash and um, arrow symbol, and then we are assigning uh, the argument that we need to pass in the image resource so that it can set that particular dice. So, for example, dice 1, dice 2, dice 3 are all the addresses of the drawables. R is the directory, which and these are present in the r.drawable directory. So, all these we can pass in the image resource, and it should set the image resource to that particular. And I think it should work fine. So, let me just run it and see how it is working. So once we click on this roll button, we are getting random roles and the image specifying that particular or that concurrent role of that we're getting. And this is a very simple application, and I would like you to make it as well by your own. And there is another project called Project Lemonade in the pathway 4 during the towards the end of that pathway. So you should also be doing that. And if there is any doubt, you may ask that right now. I'll be make sure to answer it. Uh, okay, so here is the summary of that everything that we have done so far. And if you have any questions regarding this, you may ask right now uh, and use the time to read the summary if you want. Okay, great. I don't think there is any questions. I hope everything was clear, and you have an application that you can be working on, and you can learn more on the Android Basic in Kotlin course. That is the main course that actually you need to complete, and this was for your reference so that you can have uh, a follow up and a speed up boost kind of thing. And I hope uh, uh, you would continue your journey learning more Android in the main course. And if there is any problem and if you are stuck anywhere, then you can reach us in the Telegram group. As in I, along with other GDSC coordinators, would try our best to solve your queries, if any. And that is all for today. Thank you. And I hope you had a good time learning Android with Kotlin. Thank you.